Hey, what's up guys? Thanks for stopping by the channel. So for this video, we're going to be discussing the latest release to come from the Swiss watch company, which is their second generation dive watch. Now for those of you who aren't familiar with SWC, they're a family-run business and they've had some great success with their original diver that was released a couple of years ago. And in fact, one of my personal daily drivers is their original SWC Blue dive watch. It's the watch I tend to grab if I want something with a little bit more wrist presence and really good durability. Now I've also featured their sports model on the channel in the past, and of course today we're going to be discussing the Mark II iteration of the dive watch. Now I will mention that this is a review model of the diver, and it's already done the rounds with a few other YouTubers like Bob from Time to Go Travel and Timepieces. But I want to thank Josh from SWC for lending this in for the review. And if you guys really want to see more insight into the watch industry, I recommend checking out the SWC YouTube channel. They provide a lot of information about being owners in the business. So I'm going to link to their channel in the description of this video. And guys, if you're interested, I'm also going to throw a shortcut up here to my original review of the Mark I diver. And throughout the course of this video, I thought it'd be fun to do a bit of a head-to-head comparison between both timepieces. Alright guys, so now that we're in my studio, you can see I got both SWC divers in front of me, and if you purchase any of these watches, it also comes with this very nice Swiss watch company travel case, and you can store a few watches in there, so it's a nice value-added feature when considering purchasing these watches. Now I'm just going to briefly hold both of these watches up side by side and discuss the differences between the Mark II relative to the original SWC diver. And I gotta be honest, probably the only one you would notice just by looking at these watches is the difference in dial design. So with the original SWC diver, there was this brick pattern that lays just inside those MKII applied indices there, with vertical lines running down the center of the dial. Some consumers, I guess, did not like that pattern. And with the Mark II version of the SWC diver, you can see that it's replaced by this very nice sunburst on the dial. And because there's no vertical lines or anything like that, I do think that it makes the applied logo and writing on the dial pop a little bit better, and it's a little more symmetrical. Now there's a couple of other subtle changes between the Mark II and Mark I. And Josh informed me that it will be easier to access the crown on the Gen 2 version here. Even though the crowns are essentially the same size, just the way the crown guards are truncated on the Mark II should make it easier to access, but I'll actually compare that head to head a little bit later in the video. And then the last improvement for the Mark II SWC diver that really nobody I think asked for is changing up the lume. So both watches have 20 layers of super luminova applied to them. With the Mark I here, this is BGW9, and it's fantastic. But with the Mark II versions, they're switching over from, I guess, C3 on this review model to X1 Swiss super luminova, which will aid in the longevity of the lume. But I'll throw up a low light shot of both of these watches head to head, and you can see that the original SWC diver had absolutely no problems in the lume department. You get a very intense blue glow with this watch, and then the Mark II here glows a very intense green. So aside from those changes, you're going to get very similar specifications on the Mark II SWC diver relative to the original. Starting off with dimensions, you have a 44 millimeters across the case here. Flipping to the side, you have a lug to lug between my thumbs here of 49 millimeters. Case thickness comes in at about 13.5 millimeters, and that's to the top of a slightly domed sapphire crystal that has 5 layers of anti-reflective treatment on the underside here. And also the lug opening here for the supplied bracelet is 22 millimeters. Now, with respect to the indices, handset, and bezel, it's very much the same. You have these very nice broadsword style hands for easy legibility. And then you have these huge maxi applied indices that, again, just loom up very well. And I do like that they do have a nice chapter ring there with a 60-minute indicator. So being able to tell the time quickly at a glance is very easy to do. And then outboard of the dial, you have one of my favorite features of the SWC diver, and that's this ceramic bezel that has very nice raised numerals, and they're done with a high polish. And you also have kind of a radial pattern around the ceramic here. So a lot of effort went into this. The bezel itself is 120 click unidirectional. It's got the right amount of tolerance. Each click is very positive, and there's no backplay whatsoever. The alignment with the bezel, the chapter ring, and the applied markers is spot on. Now, the automatic movement powering this watch is a Swiss Solita SW200, which is a 4 Hz movement. You got about a 40-hour power reserve, 26 joules, and it's hacking and manually winding. So if you unscrew the screw down crown here, you can manually wind this movement. If you pull it out to the intermediate position, you can quickly set your date at the 3 o'clock. And then, of course, if you pull it all the way out, you can hack or stop the seconds hand, and then you can set to any reference time that you like. Now, the crown itself is quite secure. There's no problems screwing it in. You do have the SWC logo that's embossed on the crown. I do wish the crown was actually a little bit larger. Maybe in a subsequent iteration, they'll shorten up or remove the crown guards altogether. Now, finishing around the case is very good for the price point. The bezel has some very nice scalloped and polished edges. You have some nice polished release at the side of the case. And then the bracelet itself is quite sturdy. It's a nice 3-link bracelet with raised centers and intermittent polishing. And it tapers from 22 at the head to about 20 before you get to the clasp. Now, to size the links of this bracelet, it does use a pin and collar system. So there's a big collar in the center link here, and you just push the pins out, grab the collar, and it's quite a secure way to size a diver. The clasp is very similar to the original SWC diver. You have a twin trigger release here, nicely milled out swing arm. I do wish that they had more micro adjustment anchoring points, but instead they have this ratcheting dive extension system, which is okay, but I do find that if you open this up, it does kind of break up the finishing on the clasp, and you have a bit of a sharp edge here. And then you have a very nice oil press case back with the Swiss Watch Company logo, some additional information, and the case is a screw-in case back, aiding in the 300 meters of water resistance that comes with this diver. Now, before I do some wrist shots, I'm just going to unscrew the crown on my original diver here, and I'm trying to contrast that against the crown action of the Mark II diver. And if I'm being honest, I don't really notice much of a difference with respect to being able to access the crown. I don't know if that's because I do have a review model of the Mark II. I wouldn't say it's too much of a significant change at the level of the crown improvement. Okay, so I'm going to be double fisting for this wrist shot here. Let's start with the Mark II diver. So my wrists are 19 centimeters in circumference, or about 7.5 inches. And you can see that there is a bit of wrist presence with these divers. Now, sized up for my wrist, this watch does weigh in at 200 grams. And surprisingly, my original SWC diver weighs about 5 grams less, so it's 195 grams. And I can only speculate that maybe there's a slight change to the bracelet, that might account for that small difference in weight. So I'll just conclude the video with talking about pricing for these watches. I'm not 100% too sure what it's going to be, but it's definitely going to hover around the $500 US mark. Now, if you want to order the SWC Mark II diver on a rubber strap, which is actually a phenomenal strap that they used on the sports models, it will definitely be below the $500 mark. And on Bracelet, this might hover a little bit above $500, but if you're subscribed to their newsletter, there will be special pricing, which will take place in the month of November, and then these watches will be distributed to their owners in December. Now, I do want to mention too that any of the strap or bracelet options for the Mark II diver is backwards compatible with the original version of this dive watch. And that's great. So if you wanted to, for example, order one of the Mark II divers on a silicone strap and you already have the Mark I on bracelet, you can interchange those two. And it's a good way just to give new life to those watches. There will be multiple colorways for this watch too. I do have the coppery brown version of the sunburst style here, but there's at least going to be a slate gray and a blue version for this timepiece. But guys, that about wraps up my review and head-to-head comparison between the Mark II and original Swiss Watch Company divers. As always, if you have any comments or concerns, please leave them in the bottom description box of this video. Stay safe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.